Hello, this is the interviews with Richard Windmann. I am Richard Windmann. In our eighth episode, we have attorney and advocate Mitch Garabedian with us. Mitch has been doing advocacy and attorney work for victims and survivors for many, many, many decades. He's a font of wisdom and knowledge on the subject. And so welcome to the show, Mitch.
Richard, thank you for having me.
Um, to start out, let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, and what you do.
Well, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law since 1979. I grew up in Massachusetts, right on the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border. I came to Boston to law school at New England Law, and I've been practicing law since 1979. And I've been representing victims of clergy sexual abuse and sexual abuse since 1994. When a woman walked into my office in 1994 and said, "I'd like you to listen to my three children who were approximately ages 10, 12, and 8 years old. They were brothers. She had known me for years as a lawyer. She trusted me. And I spoke to the children in this very conference room. And one child was beating his brothers up violently. It didn't make any sense. It hadn't happened before. Another child was having problems washing his hands. He'd wash his hands for 2 hours or an hour until they bled. And the other child was acting out in other ways. And so I spoke to the children, and a priest was putting them to bed. He would, quote unquote, pray with them at night. And it turned out to be Father John J. Gagan. Now, she lived in the projects in Waltham. Before I knew it, other mothers were coming to me, saying they were having the same problems with their children. And now these were fatherless families for the most part. If the father was there, he's working 2 jobs a week. Another father would be absent, or there was no father at all for whatever reason in the family. And so before I know it, I had a group of mothers coming to me with their children. I investigated, and Father Gagan was sexually abusing all of these children when he was putting them to bed at night, praying with them. He was actually sexually abusing them when he was putting them to bed. And even relatives of these mothers came to me who had children who were being sexually abused by Father John J. Gagan. And before I knew it, I had 86 clients. And I brought this to the attention of the Archdiocese of Boston, and I thought they'd handle it, that they'd care about it. And they really didn't. They wanted confidentiality agreements. They wanted this swept under the rug. And at one point with my 86 clients, they offered $10 million, but they said your clients have to sign confidentiality agreements. Mm-hmm. That didn't work. That wasn't going to happen. And the clergy sexual abuse crisis in Boston broke open. And you had just Archdiocese of Boston, knowing Father John J. Gagan was a sexual abuser, covering it up. It eventually led to the demise of Bernard Cardinal Law, who got shipped out of Boston. Granted, he was given a promotion in Rome, but he lost his position here because the documents I obtained, the secret files, the Canon Law 489 files, showed that Cardinal Law knew Father Gagan was a sexual abuser, yet he sent him to another parish in Western Massachusetts here, where he continued to abuse. So from there, the clergy sexual abuse crisis was sparked worldwide because of the courage of those survivors. And I thank all survivors, whether you're a victim or a survivor. I thank you all for your courage and for allowing me to stand on your shoulders. It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mitch, for all the work that you do. What you described was depicted in the movie Spotlight, which I think won an Oscar, right?
It won Oscar for Best Picture, which was significant.
Yeah, it is. And so you were depicted in that movie as well. Did you do any consultation with them, or was it pretty hands off? Did they try to guess who you were? Did they work with you? for a while?
It was hands off. They didn't work with me. I wasn't part of the production, but they got it down. There were credible messages sent through Spotlight about the courage of survivors, about the cover-up of clergy sexual abuse, about the criminality of supervisors. Incredible messages sent. The Catholic Church is a criminal enterprise which either sexually abuses children or allows children to be sexually abused. There are tens of thousands of children worldwide who've been sexually abused by Catholic priests while supervisors covered it up. I have clients who come to me who are well into their 80s who were sexually abused. One man comes to mind who was sexually abused in 1937. And he said, I'm 87 years old. I was abused as a child. I'm coming forward now because it's time to gain closure. And anybody who would be hurt by this information, any family members have passed away. And he gained his closure. He was found credible. He received the settlement. And within 6 months, he passed away. He just needed that closure.
Yeah.
Validation. These cases truly aren't about money because there isn't one survivor victim who didn't give all the money back in the world for not having been sexually abused. But in our system, in our civil system, we use money to prove validation. And a validation means a survivor or victim, whether it be clergy, sexually abused, Boy Scouts, private schools, I've been involved in them all, can gain a degree of closure or try to heal a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what your experience has been working with victims and survivors, but you know what we have, we're going to die with. The only thing we can do is try to successfully manage it. And yeah, if I would give back my $500,000 that I got if I could just be at peace, you know, and not have the PTSD, and not have the depression, and not have the anxiety, and have good relationships. And it goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
To each and every victim and survivor, the best revenge is to lead a good, healthy life. That's the best revenge. Lead a good, healthy life. Your work, Richard, your work and every survivor's work in coming forward not only empowers each survivor or victim, but it encourages others to come forward and makes the world a safer place for children. Don't let these criminals, the priests, the Boy Scout leaders, the private school teachers, or their supervisors, don't let them steal your life. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. Don't let them steal your life. They're not worth it. They don't care. The Catholic Church is all about money. The Boy Scouts of America, all about money. These private schools, all about money. All these institutions, just about money. That's what drives them. That's what motivates them. That's what their goal in business is. It's not about the health, safety, and welfare of children.
I agree. I liken it to the mafia, actually. You know, I think the mafia learns their tradecraft from the Catholic Church. You know, all the secrecy and everything. You know, it's kind of weird that if I was a banker on Wall Street and I committed some kind of financial fraud, the FBI would come busting in my office and take my computer, hard drives, files, everything. And if I was a drug dealer and the sheriff served a warrant on my house, he wouldn't allow me to walk to the porch and give him a list of all the drugs that I used to have. They would just bust in and take the contraband and arrest me. But why not the Catholic Church?
Because they're powerful and influential. The Catholic Church is a multi-trillion-dollar organization. They use the word trillion before it ever became fashionable in the world. It's every day people will leave hundreds of millions of dollars to the Catholic Church. If you read the official Catholic directory, which is a source of telling you where a priest is at a certain time and what church he's assigned to, you'll see that they receive all kinds of foundation grants. They're worried about their foundation's money's not pouring in. For instance, the Ford Foundation or another foundation may give them, hundreds of millions of dollars in one gift. It's a multi-trillion-dollar corporation. that is so influential. They own politicians, they influence politicians, and they influence legislatures. That's why statute of limitations, for instance, are so difficult to change, because the politicians are being influenced by the Catholic Church, which is a very wealthy, influential institution. Look at Cardinal McCarrick. I represent a victim of Cardinal McCarrick. I represent the victim or survivor of Cardinal McCarrick here in Massachusetts, who successfully had a criminal complaint filed against Cardinal McCarrick. He would hobnob with the leaders of the world. Cardinal McCarrick was like the elite cardinal of the world. He spoke only to the Pope. He answered only to the Pope. The guy's a criminal.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a question from Joseph in San Francisco, Joe Shambra. He said, can you comment on the recent promotion of enablers to the highest ranks of the church, Gregory, McElroy, Supich?
Well, again, the conservative element, even the liberal element in the church, they're concerned about themselves. They have their own hierarchy. And they're going to do what's best for their own pocketbooks. They're not going to do what's best for their flock or for children or for human beings, wherever they are in the world. They're going to do what's best for them financially. I think it's very important to note that and understand that's what motivates them. That's why they do what they do. And I've represented victims, and I represent victims from here to Hawaii in the United States and around the world, approximately 10 countries. I represented over 100 victims of sexual abuse in Haiti at a Project Pierre Toussaint, where Fairfield University and Father Paul Carey and the Jesuit Society of Jesus and the Order of Malta ran a school for children. And Douglas Perlitz, who was not a priest, but he was supervised by these entities, sexually abused children and pled 20 years. He got 20 years in jail on a plea, for about 20 years for sexually abusing these children. We obtained $60 million for these children. And to show, these children, for instance, in Haiti, to show you how little the church cares, they had no food. They had no clothing. They had no shelter. They had malaria, but they didn't have any medicine. And they couldn't go anywhere to get food or medicine. There's no place to go in Haiti, for instance. Sure. And they were being sexually abused. And if they told the parent would say, this is what you have to do to eat. This is what you have to do to get your medicine. You have to just, and they wouldn't take it. And it was very painful to see that. A child would come to us, and we spent a lot of time in Haiti on these cases, and we wanted to talk to them about their case, have them, for instance, answer interrogatories, and the child would look at you skinny as a pole. The child was skinny as a pole and say, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Can you get me something to eat before I do this? And of course we did. And the child would fill his plate full, and he'd eat a little bit of the plate because his stomach was so small. Yeah. It's just disgusting. And they'd have malaria, but there was no medicine. There was no place to go for relief. There wasn't a food shelter. There wasn't a shelter as a hospital or a clinic or anything to get relief. There was nothing. Mm-hmm. And yet the Catholic Church was sponsoring an institution that Project Pierre Toussaint, which sexually abused children by Douglas Perlitz being the sexual abuser for years. Wow.
Let me ask you a question. That Boston, it's a archdiocese or a diocese?
Archdiocese.
So the
very influential.
That was my question. As depicted in the movie, they could just make records disappear. Can they still do that today?
Well, they're trying to. And I'm glad you raised that point, because I was able to get the secret files, the canon law 489 files in Boston. It took me years in court to get them, The judge would give me a few documents at a time, then I'd show him how I needed more. And before we knew it, the dam broke and we got all the documents. So Boston is influential. Boston has a high density of Catholics within it. So it's very powerful. For instance, Cardinal Sean O'Malley is the cardinal here now. He was the cleanup man in Miami for their clergy sex abuse, in Florida, I should say, for their clergy sex abuse crisis. And he was a cleanup man in Fall River, Massachusetts, with Father Porter for their sex abuse crisis. Then they brought him up here as the cleanup man, and the Pope sent him up here to Boston. Very influential, very rich, very powerful archdiocese. High density of Catholics in the New England area.
Wow. Oh, by the way, Joseph from San Francisco says, thank you for your fearless courage. Question from Alice Crochet from Houma, Louisiana. She wants to know, what are your feelings about the enabling parishioners?
The enabling parishioners, if they're enabling, they're acting in a criminal matter. I think this is an important point I'm going to make. It's an offshoot of the enabling parishioners. Many parishioners now approach me on the street and will say, I thought you were full of baloney back then. And matter of fact, I was swearing at you for years, but now I kind of believe you. I believe you because this has to stop. And that's to the credit of survivors and victims and those speaking out. But the change is not going to come, and I want to make this point, the change is not going to come within the Catholic Church. They're not going to change. They're an iceberg. If they change 0.1%, it will be something. Don't count on these criminals to change. They're making too much money. They're too influential. But what is going to change, what some victims and survivors are changing, is society's attitude about watching their children when they're with people, adults in positions of authority, whether it be a nun, a priest, a Boy Scout leader, a private school teacher. They are now watching their children more and more. That's where the change is coming from. I'm often asked this question of, why are you fighting the Catholic Church? You know they're not going to change. And when I give a person the argument I just gave you, they're like, you're right. I never thought of it like that. The change is coming because we're doing this podcast today. Richard's asking me questions and making great comments, and people are listening. Survivors, victims, non-survivors, non-victims are listening to this and saying, we're going to change things. We're aware we have to watch our children now. Thank you for sending the message, Richard. Thank you for sending the message, victims and survivors. We're going to watch our children now. That's the change. And it's a significant change. It's a significant change.
I agree with you, and thank you. It seems like the survivors and victims and attorneys like you, some organizations, they're the ones that are doing the heavy lifting in all of this. And it just, like you said, I think that parents should stop using the church and the Boy Scouts of America and other organizations as free babysitting services. Because of what happened to me, I never left my kid alone with a priest. Never.
Yeah, I mean, you've made parents aware. Not all parents are going to change, but you're making a significant number of parents aware. I can't. I'm not going to leave my daughter or son alone with a priest or a Boy Scout leader, or a school teacher, or the babysitter, or the next door neighbor. I have to keep an eye on things. I have to vet things. I have to do some research here.
Mm-hmm.
I think society's attitude has changed for the better because of the work of everyone, whether it be attorneys, advocates, survivors, victims, support groups, everyone.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on Mr. Weakland, Cardinal Weakland that just died?
No, not at this time. I've been reading a lot about him, but if you have a specific question, maybe I can answer it.
Yeah, that's what I just asked in the chat. Somebody just put out a statement. So we have a situation in New Orleans. I'm originally from New Orleans. I live in Texas now.
Yeah.
But the New Orleans Archdiocese is in bankruptcy, and there were well over 50 cases in civil court when they filed. And when they filed bankruptcy, all of those cases, all of that work product, all of depositions and discovery was basically tossed in the garbage can because they moved it to the bankruptcy court. We had been trying to get the Archbishop to be deposed for a very long time, and he always had excuses. You know, it's Mardi Gras, oh, I got COVID, or the weather's horrible. And finally, the court compelled him to testify, and as soon as that happened, they filed bankruptcy. And when they moved those cases over to federal bankruptcy court, a federal magistrate judge, his name is Michael North, he sealed all the documents, sealed all of them. In one of those depositions, it was Father Lawrence Hecker, and he admitted in the deposition that he molested children and that he took them over state lines. So that deposition is sealed, and so the FBI is having a hard time investigating. Just with that one offender, over 20 violations of the Mann Act, and there's more. There's more. What do you think about the federal magistrate sealing those records?
I think the committee, the creditors committee, which is made up of survivors, has to make as one of its settlement demands the release of all secret files, not personnel files. Personnel files, those two, but personnel files tell you where a person worked when and how much they made or whatever, or how many sick days they were on. You know, that's a curveball. The archdiocese or dioceses often tell you, we'll give you the personnel files. Well, the personnel files aren't the secret files. The secret files contain all the damaging information, what the perpetrator did, what the report was, whether he was in a treatment center, what the treatment center documents say. The creditors committee has to make as one of its non-monetary demands a demand that all the secret files be released publicly and the deposition be released publicly. Secrecy is what allowed the clergy sexual abuse, and clergy sexual abuse anywhere to exist. When a child was abused by the priest would threaten the child and say, if you told anybody, your mother's going to burn in hell, or you won't go past the 4th grade, or some statement, okay, some threat. Then when the parent did tell the parish priest, the pastor at the parish, the pastor would say, don't tell anybody, you can't damage your reputation at a church, okay? And then canon law says when clergy sexual abuse crisis claims are looked into, they shall be kept secret. So you get the triple layers of secrecy here. There has to be transparency. More than money for many survivors, the release of the secret files will help them try to heal. It's very important that the truth be told. And that's what I was able to do in Boston. It took me years to get the secret files. It took me like 4 years of litigation to get the secret files. But the creditors committee in New Orleans should make as one of its non-monetary demands the release of all the secret files. They're called the canon law 489 secret archives or secret files. So if you look at 489, 490, around there, you'll see it. The bishop has to keep under lock and key for his own review the secret files, and that has the damning information about clergy sexual abuse that I mentioned before. In the secret files in Boston, for instance, Father Gagan was sent to a treatment center, and the treatment center sent Cardinal Law a letter saying, you better watch this guy, he's got a problem. Cardinal Law sent the letter back to the treatment center saying, after all the money we pay you, you're going to give me a letter like that? And the treatment center sent the letter back to Cardinal Law saying, you're right, he's fine. You can put him back in the ministry. That's the stuff you'll see. That's the information you'll see in the secret files.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, the Secured Creditors Committee in the New Orleans bankruptcy is decimated. So they accused one of the attorneys of leaking information to the press. And so they kicked off the attorney and they kicked off 3 survivors off the committee.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Aware of that?
The diocese and the insurers in bankruptcy want to mediate, but it's really mediate through attrition and division. They want to wear the committee members out. They want to wear the survivors out. They want to wear everybody on the other side of the fence out, and they want the other side, the creditors committee and the survivors, to be divided and not in unison, not acting in unison. That's part of their game plan. It's a conscious effort. It's not anything that is brand new, but it's just an approach they take. They want the committee to be divided. They want the committee to be tired. And I've read about that instance, and I have cases across the country, so I'm familiar what's going on in a lot of jurisdictions.
So let's talk about NDAs. So my story is that I was molested by a Jesuit priest, and I went to them directly. I didn't have an attorney, and I went into mediation, and we settled for $500,000. I had to sign an NDA. They told me that I had to sign the NDA or else there wouldn't be a settlement. And I signed it. They exhaust you in mediation, man. After about 3 or 4 hours, you're just ready to get out of there. And so I settled for $500,000, got out of there. And I subsequently went public. That was back in 2012. And then I went public in 2017. And my thought is that because of the Dallas Charter, they were not supposed to make me sign an NDA. Also, that the NDA is not enforceable because they use it to cover up the commission of a crime, not protect like intellectual property rights, like with the company. And so I went public, and the reason I did that is because, you know, I kind of sold away my voice, and I summoned myself to silence when I did it. And then I felt angry and guilty because I thought that, you know, because I signed the NDA, I'm complicit in the cover-up. While at the same time, in the same breath, they're taunting victims in the press. Who are these John Does? Who are these Jane Does? In the same breath, they're making us sign away our voice. And that's when I went public. Can you talk a little bit about NDAs?
Sure, NDAs are evil. They help, as you said, perpetuate the cover-up. They make a survivor or victim feel guilty because they make the survivor of guilt and survivor victim feel as though the survivor victim did something wrong. By signing the NDA, they feel like they're part of the problem. And I think it's very important to know that the Catholic Church, for instance, cannot even request that you sign an NDA anymore. After the 2002 National Catholic Conference of Bishops, NDAs were done away with for religious orders too. Religious orders, and I give this information to many other lawyers, religious orders are not permitted, I think it's under Vademecum, not permitted to ask for NDAs anymore, but they often do. And so I think it's important for all survivors and victims to never sign an NDA. Now, there's another very important reason, and I know this because I get calls from survivors who had other attorneys, whether it be the Catholic Church or Boy Scouts or private schools, and signed NDAs. And they'll call me and say, is there any way I can get out of this NDA? Because I feel like I'm still being controlled by the very entity and perpetrator and the supervisors that caused me harm, that acted criminally. I can't tell my brother. I can't tell my child who's the age I was when I was abused. I can, an NDA can't prevent you from talking to the police or your therapist, but I can't tell very important people in my life, or I can't do a podcast. So don't ever sign an NDA because you're just going to continue the pain. And the Catholic Church, whether it be a diocese, archdiocese, or religious order such as the Jesuits or the Augustinians or the Salesians or the Franciscans, cannot ask you for an NDA anymore. They cannot do it. And they've tried. They're pretty sleek. They're pretty, they try in a sly way. They'll say, oh, we thought your client wanted it.
Yes, that's exactly what they said in my case.
Yeah. We thought your client wanted it. No, he didn't.
Yeah, and that goes a question from Aaron from Mandeville, Louisiana. He wants to know, why does the archdiocese still require NDAs when they know
They can't. They can't. If you want to, my email address is garabedianlaw.com. If you want to send me an email, I'll send you the documentation, chapter and verse. They cannot ask you for NDAs anymore. They're not allowed to. Whether in the religious orders were trying to say, well, the 2002 National Catholic Conference of Bishops only applies to archdioceses and dioceses. We can still ask for them, but they can't. I have the documents. So, I'm at garabedianlaw.com. Just send me an email and I'll send you the information. They cannot ask anymore. And unfortunately, lawyers getting into this area now who haven't had the experience don't understand that. They don't realize that. They can't ask you anymore. And as I said earlier, and as you said, Richard, the sly way to try to get an NDA from the church is to say, "Oh, I thought your client wanted it."
Yeah, and but so in the conference they said that they can't. So they can't according to the conference or according to law?
According to their own doctrine.
Okay.
I'll send you the information, Richard. According to their own doctrine, their own papers, according to what the Pope has ordered, they cannot ask for NDAs anymore. Across the board.
Okay.
NDAs are an extension of the harm.
I see. So
It's more of the secrecy.
yeah. Yeah, it's secrecy. Everything's freaking secret. And I think in terms of centuries, and everything is secret in the Catholic Church.
Right.
No
That's right.
whatsoever. None. Hey, let me ask you.
You raise an interesting point. The Catholic Church thinks in terms of centuries. They think, well, in 100 years, who's going to remember the clergy sexual abuse crisis? This will blow over and we'll be rich as ever.
Everybody will, because if they stop molesting children right now, they're going to be dealing with this for another 50 years, because that's when victims and survivors come forward in their late 40s and early 50s. If they stop right now, 50 years from now, they'll be dealing with it.
Unfortunately, they haven't stopped. Children in the 90s and the early 2000s are just starting to come forward across the country, across the world to me, just starting to contact me. They were abused in the 1995, 2001, 1998. Some of them are 35 years old or so. They're just starting to come forward. 30 years old, just starting to come forward.
So, Alice from Louisiana wants to know, how long do you think it will take to uncover the documents that are hidden? If someone is caught destroying any church records, do you think they will be caught and brought to justice as well?
I don't think the Catholic. It's very difficult because of the First Amendment to get into Catholic affairs. In Boston, we were able to tip the scales because we could show wrongful conduct by the perpetrating priest, by the criminal priest, by the sexually abusive priest. That allows you to get into the First Amendment. Freedom of religion and the Establishment Clause says the government can't get involved in religious affairs. If you want to, every Sunday, you want to stand on a chair upside down on your head and worship, you can do that. You can say whatever you want, okay? But the only way the government can get involved in church affairs is through wrongful conduct. So you have to show wrongful conduct. You have to show that those documents being destroyed were wrongfully destroyed. And let me tell you this, the way the church is, I've seen this in the last 5 to 10 years, the way the church is getting around keeping records about abuse is by not asking questions about abuse. An investigator will come to you and ask you questions, and I've seen this, and now will ask you everything under the sun except tell me about when you were abused. And so the record is, the abuse in the record is absent. I've actually sent out certified letters to investigators saying, well, when you came to my office, you asked the questions about abuse, but you never wrote anything down. You wrote everything else down. Or I've had investigators do what I say earlier, not ask questions about abuse. And I would ask the questions, and there'd be a big shouting match about why I was asking questions. And I'd say, well, you didn't ask them about the abuse, so I am. So the way they're getting around it now is by not addressing the issue of abuse. They just want to know the survivor's history, how he's feeling, his jobs, his medical history, his employment history, but they don't ask him, well, tell us about the sexual abuse.
Mhm. Now,
That's their new scheme. Remember, you're dealing with criminals. Remember, you are dealing with criminals. When
Yes.
people say to me, they're surprised that the priest stole $80,000 from the church. I'm like, why would you be surprised? They're molesting kids and they're allowing children to be molested. Why do you think they're otherwise honest? And they look at me and they say, I never thought of it like that. Yeah, you're right.
So on the criminal side, I don't know if you work that side at all, but maybe you're familiar with it. I think that the feds need to get involved, and they are getting involved. So in New Orleans right now, there's a FBI investigation into the Catholic Church, Archdiocese of New Orleans, and I early on when I was begging for this, I said RICO, 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 and it was explained to me by several legal scholars is that the RICO statute wasn't designed for child molestation and all of this. And so, but now we have the Mann Act, and the FBI is actually moving and prosecuting Mann Act violations. What about the hierarchy? What about misprision of felony?
All I can say is, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but all I can say is, and I've just addressed this a little bit in another meeting, criminal negligence, criminal supervision by the supervisors, by the hierarchy. Laws really don't exist in the United States that are that strong to prosecute those kinds of cases in many states, especially in Massachusetts. The criminal negligence aspect is really weak, and there needs to be a change in many states' laws concerning criminal negligence. In terms of RICO, on the civil side, you can't get business damages, so you can't use RICO. But in terms of the Mann Act, it's very important that, and I had a case like this where a priest was taking a little boy in the early 70s, mid 70s, to and from Italy and abusing him. And the federal prosecutor there thought that they could prosecute, but the statute only applied to females, and they had to later amend it. And remember, unlike statute of limitations where you can create a retroactive window, criminally, you can't create a retroactive law. It's unconstitutional.
Right. Yeah, in Louisiana, we were able to get the statute of limitations completely eliminated with a 3-year look-back window. And just like Massachusetts, Louisiana is a very, very, very Catholic state. And I was really surprised. I went and I testified before the legislative committee for civil law, and everybody on there is Catholic. And so I was very skeptical that I don't even know what I'm doing here. Because they're never ever going to pass it because they're all Catholic, but they did, they did, and unanimously too. And so, what's it like in Boston or your practice areas with statute of limitations? Do you guys have a state like Louisiana that wiped it out? Or are you still fighting?
Which we're trying to extend it. Right now, we've extended it to a degree. A person can sue up until age 53, but only sue the perpetrator civilly. Then there's a 7-year discovery rule. You have 7 years from when you realize the conduct caused you harm to sue. Not when you knew it was wrong, but when you knew it was caused you harm. So it's a difficult statute, but I've been able to use it successfully. But it's not clear. There's no look back window. It's a discovery rule against the supervisors. And we have this odd thing in Massachusetts called charitable immunity. So you really don't want to sue the institutions because the most they could be liable for, well, they could be liable for anything from $0 to $20,000. So you don't want to file suit against the institutions because then all the defendants, let's say you sue the priest, the supervisors of the priest and the institution, everyone blames the institution, and then when there's a huge award against the institution, the judge has to reduce it to $20,000. The jury doesn't know about the limit, the charitable institution. But there's a way to get around that, and I get around that. If the supervisor's paid and insured, then they're not subject to the cap. It's a little complicated. I'm sorry to go off on you here.
No, that's okay. So Casey Nunez from Picayune, Mississippi wants to know, does the archdiocese or diocesan priest have a more propensity to rape kids than order priest? Or they're just...
No, I don't, it's 6 of one, a half a dozen the other. I've had, if you go to my website, the results list, there's 383 order priests or Catholic employees or diocesan priests named, and some of them I've had 150 claims against, 100 claims against. Doesn't matter. They all in on the same criminality, whether it be the Salesians, the Jesuits, Archdiocese of Boston, they're all in on the same criminality.
Okay. Talk about the law for a second. So in Louisiana, where, you know, I do a lot of work, it's Napoleonic Code, not English common law. And so in Louisiana, you can use legal concepts such as fraudulent concealment to get past prescription. Do you guys have that ability?
Not in Massachusetts. Some states, you can use the concept of fraudulent concealment. What you have to be careful is with, if the state recognizes fraudulent concealment as a cause of action, how much time do you have to sue from the fraud being revealed? In Massachusetts, the law is when you have fraudulent concealment, the clock starts ticking and you had to file suit right then and there. And if you didn't, your claim is gone. Other states say when you realize there was fraudulent concealment, you could have 3 years to sue. Other states, maybe 4 years. But in Massachusetts, for instance, and I know this from my experience in other states, but in Massachusetts, for instance, it's ridiculous. It's like you have to file right away when you realize there was fraudulent concealment. So if you realize a year ago, you're out the door.
What about vicarious liability?
Vicarious liability is a difficult one because it's defined differently in different states. Again, we go after the supervisors individually because vicarious liability is very difficult because it's not that strong, quite frankly. We try to use it, and sometimes it's successful, but other times it's not. You have to look at each state's laws. They're so different. What you think is common sense because you're in one state is just absurd in another state. It's not even thought of. It's not even used, and vice versa. And so you have to just go from state to state to state.
Okay, Aaron.
I mean, Michigan, until recently, Michigan had a statute where you had to file suit by age 19.
Who's going to do that?
Well, that's how absurd the law is. I mean,
so Aaron wants to know, you have a federal judge and his wife is on a archdiocesan board, and she also runs a nonprofit that is completely funded by the archdiocese. Is that a conflict of interest?
I would think you'd want to raise that as a conflict of interest. You know, judges, they don't want to get caught in conflicts of interest. So you raise it in court, and it's not, there's two sides to conflict of interest. One is, does it appear to be improper? If it appears to be improper, then that may cause a judge to recuse himself or herself. The other side, of course, is it actually improper? But if it appears to be unfit, it appears that you can't be objective. The appearance of impropriety is sufficient in many jurisdictions. And I want to talk about one other thing while I'm thinking about it. In bringing these claims, if you can help it, stay out of federal court, because federal court allows a limited amount of discovery. limited amount of depositions, very short time spans. And these cases are deposition intense. You need a lot of time in these cases. So if your depositions are limited and your time spans are limited, then it's not going to help you prove your case, especially when you're trying to show supervisor negligence and notice.
When you say shortened discovery, what do you mean by that? I mean, I think I know what you mean by that.
Well, you can go to court in state courts and get an extension without much trouble. You can get maybe 2 extensions because you're working on the case. In federal court, they're not so lenient. And ironically, the Haiti cases were in federal court, and it worked out great. The judge was very flexible, and I'm very glad he was an excellent judge, a very fair man. He was very smart, very intelligent. But in most federal courts, that they have strict rules. We'll give you a continuance, but we're not giving you another one, even if you need it, because we just don't do it. So you have to be careful.
Understood. So we're getting towards the end of the hour. Is there anything that you want to talk about, that you want to bring up?
I think it's just very important to survivors realize that they're heroes, that they have a lot of integrity, that they're helping others by coming forward in addition to themselves and making the world very safer for children, as I said at the outset. I think it's very important. Forget the lack of self-esteem, the lack of trust, the anxiety, the pain. Live for today. The best revenge is to lead a good, healthy life. If you need it, get into therapy. When I say forget about those damages, I don't mean you can. You have to just cope with them. And you just want to move on with your life. Dealing with the criminals is not worth it. Dealing in their world is not worth it. You want to lead a good, happy life. You've got your whole life in front of you. And I think you should treasure that, because don't let these criminals win. When you go into their world of sadness and mistrust and anger and shame, you're letting them win. Recognize the triggers. Go get into therapy. There are so many survivors and victims who've committed suicide.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's very sad. And I think you should treat yourself with dignity. Have that self-esteem. Treat yourself with respect. You deserve it. You're teaching the world about how you have to protect children against evil, and teach them that you can try to heal too. Again, no one's going to heal 100%. Again, 100% closure, but you just have to learn to live your best life, because you deserve it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, that was going to be my second question, but it kind of beat me to it. The spirit of let's talk about the church before we have to get off here. So I think when I compare the Boy Scouts to the church, I think that the Boy Scouts have a better chance of recovering from this than the church does. Where do you see the state of the church? Because I can't believe, as a survivor, victim, even a parishioner, I still practice my faith. I can't believe that they get this wrong time and time and time and time again. Because in just very simple terms, if I was the Pope, I would call all the bishops into Rome, get them in a room and say, here's the deal. It's not going to happen anymore. And if it does, you're not going to be bishop anymore. It would seem that it's that simple, on the face of it. What do you think?
I don't think they're going to change. I think they're making so much money. They're such a multi-trillion-dollar corporation, one of the richest institutions in the world, if not the richest, that they really don't care about changing. That they feel as though they're the victims. They're being victimized here. You can tell when you depose them and you talk to them, like they're making the sacrifice. They're morally corrupt, yet they're supposed to be purportedly the most moral institution in the world. But they don't care. They're on to third world countries because they're making their money down there through grants and foundations and donations. They're on to third world countries. Okay, we're done with the United States to a certain degree. We're done with Canada. Look what they did in Canada.
Look, yeah, and look what they did in Latin America too. I mean, Latin America is very vulnerable right now.
They're on to third world countries. They're a big business. The question always is the bottom line, how much money they're making.
So do you see the church dwindling? I get accused of this all the time. Is that because of the work that I'm doing, that I'm destroying the church? And I reject that. I'm trying to get the evil out the church.
All we're doing is protecting children. I mean, why would anybody say we're trying? It's not about religion. It's about a bunch of guys who are a bunch of criminals. You know, you pick your religion. It's about a bunch of guys who are a bunch of criminals. I say this often to parishioners, and they like, oh yeah, you know, well that makes sense. It's just those who want to hear me, listen to me. It's about a bunch of criminals. It's not. On what planet are you allowed to sexually abuse children and then preach morality?
Right.
On what planet does that happen?
It viscerally offends me.
And allow it to happen and then preach morality. Go into the confessional, molest a child, and come out and say mass. And let the supervisor allows you to do that. On what planet are you allowed to do that? What insanity are we talking about here? I mean, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's, you know, I still practice my faith, and what's viscerally offensive to me is that, you know, during my Catholic formation, say I'm in 5th grade and I tell a lie, I'm going straight to hell. But then these guys in their costumes, they sit there behind the podiums and they lie to our faces. And in addition to raping our children, they lie to us. That's not, it's not consistent or congruent with what I thought how a Catholic should conduct themselves.
They're immoral. They're evil. These are evil acts. Performing oral sex on a child is an evil act. Covering it up is an evil act. Letting it happen is an evil act. Take away their robes and they're just a bunch of criminals, belong in jail.
Wow.
I mean, I'm basing this on thousands. I've interviewed thousands of survivors and victims myself. I've been doing this for decades. They're just a bunch of criminals. Look at the evidence, the objective evidence we've produced over the decades.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah, we started out with this is a hoax. It never happened.
There's no excuse for this. I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's no excuse for this. This is evil.
Yeah. And, you know, I know some older parishioners that they think that the space program is fake and wrestling's real, and they don't believe that any child was ever molested. Any.
And what's interesting is to use to continue the cover up and make sure the cover up is as effective as can be. They use a punishing God. God is always going to punish you. God is, he's going to, your mother's going to burn in hell if you tell anybody about this abuse. Oh, the pastor tells the mother who's reporting the abuse, you tell anybody, you're going to destroy the reputation of the church. In other words, shame on you, you're going to be punished. You know, everything is about punishment. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Whatever happened to the loving God? Everything is, God is going to punish you. That's how the criminals try to keep it secret. Yeah. That's how they try to keep moving.
You know, pedophile is a very psychologically distinct thing. You know, it's something, you know, that all walks of life suffer from. So I hate it when other agendas piggyback on the back of victims and survivors. For example, you know, Richard, if the celibacy law was done away with, this wouldn't happen. Or if gays were allowed to be priests, this wouldn't happen. And I say no, because there are gay people that are pedophiles. There are straight men, married men who are pedophiles. Do you believe believe that allowing gays to be priests, or do you, the celibacy rule, if you think that was lifted and married men would be able to be priests, do you think that would end the problem?
Oh, no, I think pedophilia is unique to the pedophiles. Many survivors who have come to me through the decades have said, I can understand that the pedophile priest had a problem, but how do you get over the fact that the supervising priest, who did not have the problem, let it happen? It's a criminal culture. I mean, it's not even limited to the Catholic Church or the boys. I represent more than 20 survivors of a Boston Red Sox groundskeeper who molested children across the United States. I mean, you can't let this happen. There has to be morality put in place and proper supervision, proper vetting. I mean, letting pedophiles marry is just going to cause them to have children that they're going to abuse.
Good point.
It's just not going to end. It doesn't end like that. It's a serious defect.
Mm.
And the crime is the child cannot protect himself or herself. Any victim, whether an adult or child, cannot protect himself or herself, is very vulnerable and needs to be protected. Whether because they've been given a drink and something in their drink in the bar, or whether they're a child or whatever.
Yeah.
We need a change in our societal attitude. And I think it's been forming because of survivors across the board coming forward, whatever the movement may be. But then there needs to be a change. I don't understand why a pedophile would all of a sudden stop abusing children if he was married. Why wouldn't he just go out and have an affair with a woman instead of abusing children? It takes a defective mind to abuse a child.
Well, so we're at the end of the show. Is there anything else that you want to say? Something that you want to plug or anything?
Well, I'm at GarabedianLaw.com in Boston. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to send me an email. It's been an honor speaking with you, Richard. It's been an honor to all the survivors who are listening and those who are interested, who are not survivors. And thank you for letting me do this work. It's really rewarding to me, and it means a lot to me. And hopefully together we can continue to change the world, and we are changing the world.
Well, Mitch, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I know that you're very, very, very busy, man, and we appreciate your insights, your discussion, and like Mitch said, if you have legal questions or if you have a case, give him a call. I can tell you that he's an incredible attorney, and he can work in many jurisdictions. So thank you, Mitch. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.